Hackitude is an attempt to get Birmingham people together to act on ideas that people have sent through to try and maybe make Birmingham a little better, or to try and improve the digital side of Birmingham in some way. It was sort of an antidote to the industry meetings and shindigs that seem to go on throughout the UK or throughout the year, and to try and counteract that with sort of hard and fast action, as opposed to just lots of sitting and talking and planning and stuff like that. So it was sort of organised quite quickly, and with very little planning, to just get people in and get people doing something.
Do you think that happens a lot, people talking and not really doing?
It feels like it. Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of the doing gets done behind closed doors, so you don't necessarily see all of that stuff. And a lot of the doing of things can be commercial stuff, so it's not always out in the open. But what we wanted to do was to do stuff, but also make the results of that available to the world, so that people could see transparently what was going on.
And when you say we, what types of people did you try and gather together?
I wanted to try and combine people who had really cool ideas but didn't necessarily know how to make them happen, and then the people who absolutely knew how to make those happen. So it ended up being a greenhouse of geeks, and sort of designers and tech heads and stuff, which is great. And then we had people popping in who had come up with ideas, or just wanted to come along and see what we were doing, or just sort of be creative disruptors.
What was the aim that you set out for them at the beginning of the weekend?
Well, what we started out with was we wanted to look through all of the ideas that we'd had. About 25 ideas that people had submitted in the sort of a 3-week period, and the idea was we wanted to look through all of them and see what ones we could tackle. And what we seemed to find was that so many of the ideas were about local based things. People wanted local information. They wanted information about where they lived and what was going on and what it was safe to do, in their area. And so rather than building lots of different systems that could do that, we thought, wouldn't it be great if we could build a generic sort of framework that all of that stuff could be placed onto? Mm-hmm. So any information from what parking spaces or where it's safe to park in places, to where it's safe to take your dog for a walk, or even things like what street lights are left on, what lights are left on in public buildings, all that kind of stuff that people wanted to know about their city. We could plot all of that in one database and allow people to get information in and out.
How did you go about finding the data, especially for something like the lights left on overnight?
Well, for the lights one, that would really need people just to be out and about. We didn't have any ready-made data for that one, but it was an idea that I think Dave Hart had submitted. He also submitted one about allotments, which we had data for, and that's what we've used as our test case. But for the lights left on, we knew that it would involve a bit of crowdsourcing, so that would be people going out throughout the city, and whenever they saw something, they could log it. Maybe it'd just be something as simple as taking a photo on their phone and using the GPS so that we knew where they were and we knew what building they were looking at. And so we wanted a system where that data could be fairly easily collected. And
you used the allotment data as a test case. How did that work in terms of building a broader framework using that data?
Well, what we thought about was we looked at the data, but we didn't try and think, how could we build a system that can store allotment information? We looked at that and said, okay, that's one type of information. How can we make this as flexible as possible? And at the very last stage, take the allotment data and plot it on the system, and that's what we ended up doing. So we had to clean it up a lot. And it's sort of not live data because it was over a year old and a little bit rough around the edges, but once we cleaned it up and got it into a system that could be read by our database, it was sort of fairly easy then to build something that people could actually search quite effectively for. So you can go to our little website, which is metalocal.hackitude.org, and you can look for allotments in whatever area you want with corresponding services. So if you want to find an allotment that's got lockers where you can put your tools, or that's got running water, you can tick those boxes and it will just find those for you, which is something that didn't exist 48 hours before.
So that's like the main thing that came out of the weekend, the metalocal.hackitude.org.
That's it. That was the big project.
Yeah.
And what we quickly realised when we got to the end is that this is something that is going to outgrow Hackitude and is bigger than a hacking weekend, because we've got something now that is a massive framework that we can do anything with, and sort of the possibilities for that are really exciting and broad, which is great.
What's the next step for that specifically? Will you just build on it as people submit more information? Or?
I think so. What I've got to do is I've got a job of trying to make sure it can be as open as possible so that people can sign up and they can submit data to it, and other people can work on it and carry on developing it and designing bits for it and writing content for it. Once that's available and people can get a sort of a username and a password, a free account to sign up and put data in, then we can really focus on it and we will know and have a better idea of how the system works. And then in April or June we're going to look at doing another one using data from data.gov.uk when that hopefully sort of gets opened up to the public, taking some of that information and seeing what we can plot on our system with that.
Are there lots of other Hackitude types events going on across the UK, or are they mainly in London and Birmingham?
There are a few sort of hacking weekends and things that go along, but this is the first one under this sort of brand. And I've had inquiries from a couple of people about whether we can extend those. I think there's one in Barcelona that they're quite interested in doing, which would be great. So when I started on the Friday, I had the idea that I was going to build a system that would allow people to organise their own hacking weekends, but I got so into the meta-local thing that I never had the chance to do that. But that's still something I want to do, so that people will be able to just organise their own one. And the idea of taking the ideas that are on a board, throwing them up and taking them down and sort of dedicating resources to them, I want that to be able to be a plug and play thing that's across the board, and that's something that isn't really done that much.
Is there sort of 4 key ingredients to making a good hacking weekend?
What are the 4 key ingredients? Good geeks, good music, good food, and comfortable chairs.